Hi, welcome to another Lucinity webinar podcast. I really must get across what we're actually calling this. I am delighted to be joined today by another of our friends and partners. Pleased to introduce KK Gupta, CEO and founder of Facctum. KK, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be with you. I'm doing great. It's a Friday, um, and the weather is looking much better this time as compared to, you know, it's what it's been like. So it's good.
Absolutely. Agreed. Ready for the weekend, that is for sure.
Yeah,
So look, maybe you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself, to Factum,
yeah.
and then we'll get stuck in, shall we?
So I have a long background, more than I care to remember, in working with global banks. Worked with Citi for 17 years in 5 different locations, and then worked with Barclays again in 3 or 4 different locations over 14 years. Did variety of roles, had a lot of fun. Eventually got bored of what I was doing, and that's how Factum came about. And so we've been doing it for now 3.5 years, and we are still here. So we must be doing something right.
Yeah, I always say so. I've been with Lucinity about 3 years now, and I always say, but we're a startup, so count that kind of like dog years. It's more like 7 or 8. So I imagine, yeah, you've though you look great, maybe you've put on a couple of years in the last 3.5, huh?
I think we all feel that, but in a way, it also keeps me young, right? I think because there's so much to do and there's so much of excitement and so much. I think that you want to do because it's your own thing. So it's one way to keep yourself young, in my view. So yeah, while we're all kind of getting old, but I actually feel quite young.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear it. I have a
Yeah,
two-year-old, so I feel about 106 most days.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Factum.
So Factum is in the AML KYC, anti-financial crime domain. We are one of the pioneers and innovators in data management and looking at sort of watch list data, how to use it, how to source it, how to curate it, how to distribute it. I think we have done a lot of work, a lot of research in this domain. I mean, in the larger domain, but in this topic, right? And but we also are developing a platform, overall platform that does screening and monitoring and KYC. Things are not all very mature in all aspects, right? But and then we are partnering where we are not either choosing to invest or where we are, it's a very complex topic. In some cases, we are looking for partners, such as with Lucinity and. But we have other partners too. So, we don't need to be solving everything ourselves. There are already established players, and it's good to be doing that together in some cases. That's the approach we are taking.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think I would be the first to say that, you know, solving for financial crime, operationally, regulatorily, etc., is very much an ecosystem approach, right? So the
Yeah,
solutions do need to play nicely together, even as some of the institutions need to play nicely together, both with each other as well as arm's length bodies, regulators, so on and so forth. I think we all have a fundamental common goal, right? But you touched a little bit on, certainly where my perception of Factum is strongest, and that's very much on the screening side of things. Um, Obviously, sanctions, I think, have come into, let's say, the public consciousness over the last few years with the rise of Putin's war in Ukraine, etc. Um, So maybe you could just set the scene a little bit as to what are the primary challenges with screening today?
I mean, there are many. Some of them haven't changed, right? But there are new ones, right? So one is the frequency and the velocity, right, of new sanctions getting announced and changes being announced, etc., because of the various wars and geopolitical situations and many other sensitivities that we are dealing with. Uh, the ecosystem of sanctions or the lists or the regulators are sometimes all converging on, but also doing it faster and in more numbers. I think the growth in sanctions has been phenomenal in the last 2 or 3 years. But also in some cases, the regulators are not converging. The EU has a different point of view sometimes, and US has a different point of view, and sometimes they are actually diverging, and which is something that we haven't seen all that much in the past. So how, as a bank, when you are a global bank and dealing in multiple geographies, how do you deal with these variations or divergences, etc., in a way that you are not foul of any of the major regulators, and you are also not uh, in sort of you also in compliance with the local regulators and the expectations that you have in different markets, right? So it's become complex, very complex, that's one aspect of complexity that has grown. Another aspect that has grown is just the rise in instant payments and faster payments and so on and so forth. And so, I mean, the recent example being the SEPA instant payments in Europe. And when you have an expectation across 25 plus markets where anyone can pay anyone in any country within this region, and the payment has to reach within 10 seconds, the complexity or the conventional wisdom of how screening is done, I think, is just thrown out of the window, and you have to come up with different approaches. So, and how do you also get uh, fresh sanctions data as quickly as possible after a new sanctions designation has been announced? That in the past, I think 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours used to be okay, but now the expectation is that as soon as something is done, get that into your system. So the freshness of sanctions data also is become a challenge.
Absolutely. I think it's obviously a common theme of the conversations that we have, is that often things fundamentally boil down to the data, right? And as you say, when you're operating cross borders with multiple product lines, multiple customer demographies, etc., it's a question of, well, how do we trust that the data is correct across the length and breadth of our organization to a certain extent? But one thing that I'm interested, particularly in what you were talking about there, is to the curation of data, right? So, broadly speaking, the watch lists are the watch lists when it comes to sanctions. Of course, as you say, constantly evolving, constantly changing, subject to the winds of geopolitical change, for want of a better word. But maybe you could speak to what you mean by curation. Do you just mean in the context of sanctions, or also, those maybe slightly less nebulous factors such as PEPs or adverse media, conceivably, and how they feed into a financial institution's risk appetite?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So in the past, what I've seen is that not a lot of thought has been given to ensuring that the list that financial institutions are using for their screening are appropriately sourced, and I mean all the technical kind of freshness and completeness, etc. Moving beyond that to actually look at the kind of customers you have, the kind of risk you have, and then come up with, okay, well, if I have these customers, if I'm in these geographies, if I have these risks, what are the lists, I mean, not just the list, the overall list, but what sort of categories or keywords within that list are uh, some things that I should focus on, right? I mean, am I over screening? If I just take the entire list, then um I may be over screening. I may be, boiling the ocean, and the more data you're going to screen against, the more matches you're going to find, and then the resources that you have to investigate those alerts and those matches, I think, are going to be diluted because you have so much of workload to deal with. So we have often seen that because there haven't been enough considerations or enough platforms for curation of data, and by curation, what I really mean is that getting the data, making sure that it's current, it's got you can schedule it on the right, I mean, so that you can download it, you can put data quality rules into it, you can deduplicate it, you can reconcile it, you can make sure that if you're using multiple lists, that you don't have multiple profiles, you can get a single profile that that you're screening against. You can also combine it with your internal watch list. Many of the financial institutions don't rely just on the external watch list, but they have their own internal things that they have on their own private list. And how do you manage that? And how do you manage the full life cycle of that data? How do you make sure that nothing has been missed, or if things are changing, if a new keyword has been added or new sanctions have been announced, that it hasn't been missed in actual output, the actual output that's going or being ingested into your sanction system. So there's a number of things that have to happen in the entire data journey from the time from the point of getting the watch list or getting watch lists, as many of the institutions are having to do, all the way to delivering that data into your sanction system. There's a number of workflows and controls and checks and inclusions and exclusions that you have to do, deduplications and reconciliations. That is really what I mean by, I know it's a long answer, but hopefully that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And as you say, if you think going from OFSI or OFAC through, let's say, the commercial data providers, we all know who they are. They're pretty big shops, right? And then typically, I guess, you know, a large financial institution of the type that we're sort of talking about now will have relationships most likely with each of them in some capacity,
Yeah.
as well as you say, their own internal customer profiles, their own internal appetites across geographies, etc. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. So I guess a question that interests me, and as you say, you know experience in these global financial institutions, and I guess it feeds into, aside the fountain of eternal youth, kind of what prompted you to found Facctum, right? Um, what is it, where are the failures, or where have been the failures that prompted you to think that, there was a way we could do it better?
Again, a good question. I mean, I don't, I will give the answer that, I can think of right now, but, I think the problem has not been solved well. It's a difficult problem. I mean, it's not an easy problem to solve. But I think it's not been solved well, right? Or as well as I think the the current generation of technology, the data, and the various ways of deploying solutions and making sure that these things are not only deployed right the first time, but that there is a way that they can be managed and maintained, very, very sort of frequently and regularly, right, without a lot of, heavy lifting. So, I mean, I've seen and I've worked in two banks and I've managed some of these systems in these banks, that these are fairly monolithic systems that take a long time to uh, implement, integrate. Most of them are on-prem, right? And to then every 2 or 3 years you have to go through a massive upgrade cycle, and it's very costly. And then at the end of it, you don't get all that very much, at the end of the upgrade, right? So, um, So there are a number of things that can be modernized, and there are many of us. I mean, not just Lucinity and Factum, but there are many players in the market that are looking to innovate in different ways, and I believe that each one of us, is contributing to disrupting the way that the problem has been traditionally solved, and it may take some time uh, for the innovation to really sort of come to life and for it to embed sort of across all the large financial institutions, but it has to happen, and I think it will happen, and we are seeing some of that in what we do. But I would be sort of interested in your thoughts as to what you are seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, speed is obviously something that springs to mind, right? That being speed to iterate, speed to test, speed to deploy, and run that kind of virtuous cycle
Yeah,
through again. And exactly as you say, um, traditional legacy infrastructural version 2 to version 6, yes please, that'll be $20 million, in a kind of cloud native world. Absolutely. I think there we've seen the migration from, even in the kind of, let's say, strictest, most tightly regulated financial institutions in the world over the last 5 years, the comfort, shall we say, in migrating from on-prem to cloud has been actually comparatively quite quick. um,
yeah,
Especially even if you begin to look at, um, like the Middle East is somewhere that springs to mind, right? Where a data sovereignty question 4 years ago would be an absolute non-starter, and now we're seeing the provisioning of data centers in the Middle East, etc. I think absolutely that sort of cloud native strategy is embedding more deeply, and that does enable players like ourselves to innovate more quickly, because we don't necessarily need those same infrastructural costs, box in a basement, 200 FTEs just to maintain the thing type aspect. So yeah, absolutely, completely agree with that. The other thing, obviously, that's I know the £8,000 elephant in the room is AI, right? I remember joking 4 or 5 years ago that people were talking about AI when really what they meant is sort of machine learning. And now here we are in the world of Gen AI agents, etc. But it's still beholden to the data, right? Um, GIGO is a principle that's not going anywhere. So I guess the question back to you then would be, in light of speed, appetite to iterate, appetite to innovate, in line with the parameters that regulators, governments, public sector, public bodies will allow, how do you, not necessarily offset, but how do you satisfy the GIGO principle if you are going to look to adopt AI?
yeah. So it needs, first of all, picking the right use cases, right? I mean, one has to start. One can't just go like, well, we'll just do it everywhere, or and then see how it goes. But I think to pick the right sort of problems and use cases, right? That number one, and then doing testing and perhaps working or co-creation with some customers even. We have seen that to be quite useful, and then keeping it sort of incremental, not trying to boil the ocean. I think to kind of sort of start with nothing and then introduce version 1 of your AI model, etc., like in some application or some use case, and then make sure that that works, after having done testing and parallel testing and and user testing, uh, and um, and then keep improving that incrementally. Yeah, because you learn from what you have done, you learn from your customers, you learn also from the ecosystem and the industry of what's happening in the world, right? So there's new stuff happening all the time. So I think that's how we have done it. I'm not sure if that is that makes sense to us, and we have seen good outcomes, and but controlled outcomes, right? We need to make sure that we're not introducing it either too early or too prematurely or without enough testing, but it has to have the elements of uh, audit, control, explainability, all of these things, narration, etc. Something that simple human beings can understand, and those are some of the principles. If you attach those principles and adhere to those principles, then um, I think you're making progress, and you don't have to go too far too soon. I think, yeah, I think that is how we are doing it.
Yeah, and I think it makes perfect sense. Do you know, as you were talking there, the metaphor that kind of sprang to my mind is basically a cliche now, right? Is, oh, we're building this plane while we're flying, right?
Right.
But then again, to stick with the global financial institutions, right? If we don't think of them as a plane, we think of them as an aircraft carrier or a city, maybe, right? Is how big these institutions are. And I'm thinking about it in the context of sort of the data hygiene aspect, especially, right? When you think that, some of these institutions have been, around for 150, 200 years, whatever the case may be, they've certainly not grown purely organically, right? It could be thousands of businesses kind of bolted together. So like, who knows what the golden record is, to use that term, right? Um, Obviously, it's not only a pertinent question for a financial crime or compliance function, right? It's across the length and breadth of the business. It's fundamentally the lifeblood, right? We're looking from product to technology to sales, so on and so forth. So with those two kind of thoughts in mind, and with your principle of start small, but I wonder if you could speak to, specifically in the context of watch list management in light of, let's say, or informed by that kind of aircraft carrier legacy.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me give you a couple of examples, right? Maybe we go with that.
That'll be helpful.
So, one of the things that we have looked at is how do you get, uh, sort of almost real-time sanctions data, right? And that sounds simple. I mean, why won't you get it? I mean, everything is real time these days. So how difficult is it to get real time sanctions data?
I mean,
But
sorry, but
yeah,
real time is a loaded term in itself, isn't it?
I know, I know, I know, and I think that in the past, I mean, or even now, I think up to 24 hours can be considered like that is as good as it gets type of thing. And and I think many institutions are still going with that kind of an approach
Well,
because they don't know any better.
if you look at the IB side of the house or asset management, talking about T+1, right, in terms of
Yeah,
assessment.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think with the technology that's available, with the mindset that I think real time mindset that now we have, and all of us all of us have, regulators have, in terms of okay, wanting to make sure that real time means real time or very near real time, right? We feel that for example, OFAC announces new sanctions or European Union announces new sanctions, it is really not that difficult. I mean, it's not trivial, but it is not that difficult to go and detect a change within 5 minutes or 3 minutes of that change actually getting published, or a new press release or a new journal or a new list getting published. And then to be able to bring that data into your ecosystem within maybe another 5 minutes, 10 minutes after that. So, and we have seen that that approach can work. There is technology for it. Even if it is unstructured data, we can apply a number of different models that are available in AI to be able to pick up that a PDF document or unstructured document, etc., and then convert that into a structured data set. Then the kind of the ecosystem, or the sort of the aircraft carrier sort of a thing. Whereas even if you get this data, which is part one of the challenge, how do you get this data quickly into your ecosystem? I think we have solved that problem, and there are many others that perhaps are working on it or have done it, right? But we are focused on how we have approached it and solved it. But then, even if you get this data quickly enough, right, then how do you get this data into your sanction screening systems quickly enough, right? That requires the many systems out there. Certainly, I think we have designed our screening systems to be able to ingest this data quickly and almost as soon as the data comes. But the many solutions out there are not able to do it right now. So even if the data is delivered quickly, it sits there for several hours before it can actually be ingested into these systems. And I think that part of the ecosystem has to rapidly evolve and advance for the actual outcome of real-time sanction screening to become a possibility or reality.
So that's really interesting, and I think, in my comparative layman's brain, right, I think about the distinction between the need for near as damn it real time in payment screening,
Right.
and the comparative leisure with which we can take customer screening, right, or name screening. But I guess what you're speaking to there is, well, if you've got a sanctioned person on your books, even if they have only been sanctioned in the last 10 minutes, you are still fundamentally banking or serving a sanctioned entity.
Correct.
So actually what you're pointing to there, I suppose, is the ability to know that that person or entity has become sanctioned, become aware of that, and then do something about it in damn near real time.
Yeah.
Without, let's say, having the operational burden of actually having to have a person go in, see whether or not that person or entity is on your books, and then do something about it.
Yeah, and sometimes some of these changes are like across, I mean, we have seen new sanctions getting announced or amendments to existing sanctions, like up to like, in one of these instances, you could have 1,000 or 2,000 entries, right? You're not going to sit there manually to go and look for so many things in a large bank across so many different geographies. So you need automation, you need control, you need to make sure that you're able to then also prove it to your stakeholders, your regulators, your auditors, etc., that you have something which works which works all the way from the beginning to the end, right? And that and I think it's that is where we need to get to, because frankly, a new sanctions is announced, and you could be, until you actually have that data or that sort of watch list entry into your screening system, you could be still sending out a payment without knowing that this actual individual is or entity has been put on a sanctions list. And that is a weakness in the current system. And if you are a sanctioned entity, if you've just been sanctioned, as soon as you are sanctions, as soon as you find out that you are sanctioned, you're likely to move your money quickly. And that is, the first 24 hours, the first, 48 hours are the most critical, I think, in terms of trying to deal with I think for the institution to try to have enough controls, but for the individuals or entities that are sanctioned to try and sort of beat the system. So I think it's a classic kind of a problem um, that I think exists today, and there are solutions that we are starting to see. We are certainly quite passionate about this thing, so we're working hard. I think there is a lot of progress we have made. There's still some distance to go, but um, and that's the future in my view.
That's a really, really interesting point. And I see that we're just coming up on time, but I think you've just opened a can of worms in my mind around obviously the 25% rule, beneficial ownership, um, particularly around that first 24 hours, and some of the, let's say, Russian oligarchs who are obviously particularly prevalent in London. Um, Naming no names, but yachts on the Thames kind of thing springs to mind, right? But maybe that's for another conversation. Look, KK, I just want to say thank you very much indeed. I think it's been a really interesting conversation for me personally. Hopefully for our audience as well. I'll give you the last word.
Well, first of all, thank you. I think it's been an interesting conversation. We are, seeing, both in terms of complexity in the political, geopolitical situation, but also I think now with Gen AI, with agents, with data, and all the things you can do on the cloud, etc. All of these things. Perhaps the complexity now can be dealt with, right? Or you have to sort of start from the first principles, and that's what we are doing, and at least that's what we are trying to do, right? And it's only the customers are going to decide, and we're going to see how effective we can be. But we have seen some success, and we are grateful to our partners and our clients for encouraging us, for challenging us, and we look forward to working with them and and anticipating new problems and leveraging new technology. So thank you, and thank you for this wonderful, conversation. Let's continue the conversation, and look forward to another such opportunity. So thank you so much.
Likewise. Cheers, KK.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.